I'm a sucker for roguelike card games, and so I picked up Roguebook a couple weeks ago to try it out. Since then, I've been playing a run or two most days and having a great time with it. I'm going to talk about what the game is, what I like about it, and where it fell a little flat for me. If you end up being interested in buying the game, I'll link to an affiliate store in the description that gives you a Steam key and helps out the channel financially. So let's get into it. As mentioned, Roguebook is a deck builder roguelite where you play as a team of 2 heroes. You explore an overworld, collect more cards and upgrades, and fight through 3 different areas with their own enemy types and final bosses. The biggest immediate differentiator of Roguebook compared to other roguelike card games is how you manage and control a party of 2 heroes. Each hero has their own deck, and when you play cards, it matters which hero plays them and whether that hero is in the front or the back. For example, some cards have extra effects or reduce costs depending on where you play them from. Additionally, when you're attacked, it's always the front hero that takes damage. You can defend against that damage with block stacks. Whenever an ally plays a block card, they move to the front, and stacks are shared between the 2 heroes. So, as a whole, this swapping mechanic in hero positioning feels both impactful and novel. While there are other roguelike card games with parties, such as Trials of Fire, the way this 2-hero mechanic works feels unique. But outside of this 2-hero mechanic, I would say the combat feels very similar to Slay the Spire, more so than some other card game roguelites that I played. And because of that, I think I could directly apply my experience from Slay the Spire to Roguebook with how to both play cards and build a deck in terms of combos, balancing, block, attack, and utility cards, those kind of things. And this allowed me to win 4 out of 5 or so of my first few runs in this game. I wouldn't describe this as a fatal flaw. Slay the Spire is, after all, one of my favorite roguelites of all time, but it did make Roguebook feel less unique at a first pass before I got more into the game and saw its depth and saw what was actually there. Still, I don't think that the combat is that mechanically unique, although some other non-combat gameplay elements definitely are. Outside of the combat itself, you explore an overworld, and this is where the deck building and party management elements come in. As a whole, I actually really enjoyed the overworld exploration in Roguebook. The overworld has a hex grid format, and it plays into the theme of the game, which is that you're trapped in a book. When you start a run, only a small path is cleared, and the rest of the map is covered. You can uncover the map by using brushes and inks to reveal tiles, and you get more brushes and ink by winning optional fights that you find throughout the map. Once tiles are revealed, you can find things in those tiles, including Vaults of Wisdom, that give you new cards, health potions, random worlds events. So there's a bit of strategizing and prioritizing to decide what's most important to spend your brushes and ink on, as well as maximizing the number of revealed tiles possible to get a higher chance of finding things. You can also find gems in the world from the merchant and as combat rewards, and you can use these gems to upgrade your cards. Gems might make a card cost less in specific conditions, might make you draw it at the start of the game, or give a small damage boost to the card. It's a fairly flexible card upgrading system, which is great. It allows for some unique and fun synergies, but some gems are really only good on certain cards, so it's not as flexible as that initially seems. You also collect treasures or relics in the overworld that provide crossfight buffs. And some treasures are party-wide, while others are hero-specific. For example, one party-wide treasure gives you block stacks if you play enough attack cards in a turn, while an example of a hero-specific treasure is one that deals damage whenever a certain hero plays a high-cost card. And this is another area where the 2-hero dynamic comes into play. You also get to choose which hero gets which treasures, which allows you to synergize those treasures with certain cards in each hero's deck. For example, if you usually have one hero in the front taking damage, you might give that hero a healing relic in order to combat that. Along similar lines, when you get more cards in your deck, you unlock new upgrades in a randomized talent tree of sorts. Each level lets you choose between an upgrade for each hero and a party-wide upgrade, and this allows for new synergies with your deck and overall strategy in different ways. It's important to note there are very few ways in Roguebook to remove cards from your deck, though there are occasional ways to transform cards into new ones. Roguebook is not the card game for you if you like to play with small, minimal, tight decks, and partially because of this talent tree that requires you to have a lot of decks to unlock these upgrades, these talents. When crafting your party, you choose from 4 characters, which means that there's a total of 6 possible 2-hero combinations. Each character has their own playstyle and mechanics, unique cards, and unique starting treasure. I think the character playstyles feel pretty different, which is good, but I wish that the different characters had more truly unique mechanics. Outside of Cypher's rage mechanic, the other character differences feel more playstyle differences rather than mechanical differences. The specific summons or attacks for each character might be different, and a character like Aurora focuses more on drawing cards as a core mechanic, but all characters draw cards, all characters have some form of summon, etc. These characters are also a little unbalanced. Personally, I've really struggled to get wins with Aurora, while I had a much easier time with Cypher. This is also not just a me problem, because the developers actually released win data on these different party compositions, which showed a similar trend in the general player base. They have said that they're working on balancing these characters, so we'll see how that goes in the future. But overall, I liked how the deck building and party crafting elements work in Roguebook. And that's really what takes this game to the next level for me. Having to choose which character to prioritize, getting which treasures, finding synergies that work across character decks, and exploring the overworld were all really enjoyable to me. I did often prioritize one character over the other in my party, which led to one stacked characters and one sort of secondary character, but my most fun runs involve satisfying synergies within each deck and between them. Also, the dying mechanic in the game is nice. Your heroes have separate health pools, and when one of them dies, they are knocked out and can be revived by either winning the fight or playing 5 of their cards within the fight as they are downed. However, when a character is downed, you get 2 wound cards shuffled into your deck, which are basically dead cards that take up space. So even if you survive, the wounds can add up later for more trouble, which feel like a nice mix of punishing mechanics and allowing for recovery and allowing for comeback. For some more minor complaints that I have with the game, there is no game speed option in Roguebook. I think that the base game speed is actually fine, so it's not a big issue, but there are occasional moments where animations and actions will stall out, especially when you have cards with multiple effects. So for example, if a card moves a character, attacks, and blocks, sometimes that card will stall out between actions, which leads to annoying delays or slowdowns. But again, that's a more minor complaint. Also, there was a controversy with the game's launch in regards to its DLC. Basically, the game locked a relatively small amount of content behind a day one $8 DLC. It was a couple cards, gems, treasures, and one random event. The idea was that it was only meant for players who wanted to show extra support for their developers. But it was also just artificially blocked content behind a fairly high price relative to what you're actually getting. And it led people like myself to avoid buying the game when it first released. The developers have apologized, remedied the situation a couple days after launch, and all of the content is in the base game now. So if you're avoiding buying the game for that reason, it has been addressed by the developers. Now let's talk about RNG and randomness in Roguebook. The biggest sources of RNG are in the map layout, the talent tree order, and what treasures, gems, and cards you find on a given run. In regards to map layout, the map itself is always square, but where everything is on that map is randomized. So there are some general guidelines that are true run to run. More specifically, a lot of map elements, such as treasures or orbs that give you extra energy in your fight, are usually split so that one is on each side of the map. Because of that, the RNG and map layout is more of a nice flavor element than truly impacting runs. In terms of building your deck, you always have a choice of cards. So which cards you can choose from is randomized, but you never have to take a card if you don't want it, but there are some small exceptions to that rule. Of course, also has that standard RNG with card games, with what card you draw a win, and that can have a big impact on your fight. There are also a couple cards and relics that have built-in RNG, such as targeting random enemies, but these cards and relics are not super prevalent, and they're also avoidable if you don't want to deal with that. The biggest area where card RNG felt perhaps overly impactful is that some cards are incredibly strong either on their own or in certain builds, so that they can, by themselves, give you a win condition. In other words, there are times where one card can take a deck from okay to a really good deck. That one card can effectively win a boss fight on your own if you have it, such as Hate Seed on Cypher. So getting good luck with those pickups can be super important on how successful your run is. Outside of those cards, the treasure and enemy pools are both decent. You won't get the same treasures run to run, but you'll recognize all of them and know all of them pretty quickly. There are certain treasures that are obviously more helpful than others, or more helpful for some characters, but I never felt screwed over by the treasure RNG. Similarly, the enemy variety is decent, although if you complete every fight on a given run, you'll probably see almost every enemy type. The random world events that you run across are probably the most randomized aspect of the overworld, because they are both rare and have a very large pool of possible events. In all of my playthroughs, there's some events that I've only gotten once. I know there's some other events out there that I haven't seen yet. So as a whole, I think the randomness in Roguebook is good. It has a good amount of variety run to run, but it doesn't feel like my run is determined by randomness. There are, of course, a couple exceptions. Most notably, certain cards are just very powerful in certain situations. But overall, I think the game strikes a nice balance here as a whole with RNG, variety, and those aspects. Now let's talk about run-to-run progression in Roguebook. The game focused primarily on an overlapping system of vertical and horizontal progression. When you go on runs, you collect book pages that passively level up your characters, or count, or party level as you collect them. These level ups unlock new, often more powerful cards for each character, and leveling up your party unlocks new gems and treasures for future runs. These unlocks from levels mostly give variety, but as a standard for these type of games, there's also some soft vertical progression there, where later unlocks are generally better than the starting pools of items and cards. Additionally, you only start with 2 characters unlocked, but you can unlock the next 2 characters pretty easily. Next, you can actively spend your pages to unlock direct upgrades or embellishments, and there's a lot there to unlock. Most of these unlocks affect the overworld or improve what you start with. For example, one upgrade might add more health potions into the world, one other might make you start with the random gem you can upgrade a card with. The only buffs that directly affect combat are buffs to each character's maximum health, though obviously all the overworld buffs also make the fights easier, just less directly. There are also difficulty levels to climb and a somewhat unique vertical progression system. Once you've completed your first run, you can select a customizable difficulty setting. There are 3 different types of challenges, and you can select one level of each challenge in each of these 3 columns that affect different aspects of the game. One affects gold gain and spending at merchants, one affects the overworld and exploration, and the other affects combat more directly. Many challenges also have both a positive and negative aspect, which is a gold challenge that shows you all of the gold on the map, but also makes you take damage when you actually pick up that gold. The run's difficulty level is determined by adding up your difficulty level or challenge level for each of the 3 columns, and as your run difficulty level increases, your enemies get harder, the bosses get buffs, those sort of standardized, more direct challenges are added to the game. I really like the variety and customization here. It allowed for some strategy and planning for which heroes might best fit each challenge. Because there were so many possible combinations to add up for each difficulty level, I feel like I was getting a lot of gameplay and strategy variety out of planning my heroes and decks to fit those specific challenges as I faced them. I also liked that many of the challenges had small gameplay benefits or changes along with their drawbacks. Combined, the flexibility in choosing challenges and the variety of the challenges helped me put more time into Roguebook than I originally expected, and I didn't feel like I was hitting a sudden difficulty wall like I have in some other games. Additionally, while there is a lot of vertical progression in buffs and unlocks, I got most of the important ones pretty quickly. After the important unlocks are done, most of the remaining unlocks are minor RNG increases, such as a 3% chance to get a higher rarity card, which is nice, doesn't feel frustrating to not have. However, this good pacing that I experienced might not be true for everyone. Notably, you get more pages when you complete higher difficulty levels, and completing a difficulty level for the first time gives a flat number of pages. And beating the final boss, regardless of difficulty, also gives more pages than the rest of the run. I personally found the low levels to be fairly easy, partly because of that crossover knowledge from Slay the Spire that I talked about earlier, and because of that, I beat most of my first runs, which allowed me to get the important cheap unlocks pretty quickly. However, if you fail most runs or can't climb the difficulty levels quickly, your progression will be much slower, because so much of that progression is tied to having successful runs. Also, as I've gotten much higher at the difficulty levels, as I've climbed those ranks, the runs have gotten a lot harder for me, so they're not super easy like they were at the beginning. Let's talk briefly about the story of Roguebook, which is set in the world of Feria. In this game, you play as heroes who are trapped in the Roguebook and who are trying to escape. I really like the theme of the game and how the gameplay elements, such as using ink in the book, fit with that theme. The game has an okay amount of world building through its random events, and also has a great opening cutscene to set the stage for your runs. I really enjoyed the art style and animations in this game as well. With that being said, the narrative elements in Roguebook are pretty standard for roguelites. There's some nice backstory and a nice setting, but it's just not really that focused on the narrative elements. So what's my verdict on Roguebook? Overall, I think Roguebook is worth picking up if you like deck builder roguelites. At first, it feels similar to other card games like Slay the Spire, but it begins to set itself apart with the 2-character system, the progression system, and the customizable difficulty system. The vertical progression of the game might not be for everyone, but I found that you get the important unlocks pretty quickly, so it never feels grindy. Additionally, while some of the combat elements in Roguebook are novel, the combat itself doesn't add a lot of new mechanics to the roguelite card game genre. Rather, it stands out for being well done and having the accompanying systems such as the overworld feel unique. Please like this video to help me on the algorithm, and thanks for watching.